I write in like sprints and fevers, so it's not always, it's like my handwriting always changes too, which I think they say is
Really?
sociopathic, but I'm just going to have to surrender to that.
Hi, Tommy. Welcome to One Nightstand.
Hi, Sam. Thanks for having me.
So happy to have you here.
So grateful to be here.
Tell me, were you always a big reader growing up?
I really was. I mean, I think I grew up with the fortune of not having iPads because I think otherwise I would have been an iPad kid. No judgment. I just, I was right at the end of the millennial sort of generation.
I think we're the exact same
Are we?
age.
Yeah.
I'm
So it's
32,
like,
so.
yeah, I'm 32. I'm 33 next month or this month, whenever this comes out. I'm 33 on May 13th. I think that, yeah, I had to read because I didn't have other tools. I loved anything that took me out of myself, which is why I used to do so many drugs, I think. So to me, books offered a true escape from my reality.
What was the first book you remember as a kid reading and being like, oh, this is a portal for me?
I read a lot of like Roald Dahl,
Love Roald Dahl.
and like I read a lot of Shel Silverstein.
Yeah.
And, The Giving Tree. And I think the first book, and I wonder if this is going to be the same for you, was Harry Potter. Because I was getting into a new level of literacy when those books were coming out. So they were the first longer form YA adult adjacent crossover books that I was able to read on my own.
To go to your first pick, Running with Scissors was huge for me.
Huge.
When I was a little later on.
Huge for me. I had never read a book that I so deeply related to in my life. And I would say both Augusten Burroughs and David Sedaris as writers, like Me Talk Pretty one day as well, not to bring other books into this conversation, but those were the books I read that made me want to write. That gave me a sense that I could potentially had a story to tell at some point in my life. And Running with Scissors was in many ways a queer affirmation story for me. It wasn't a realization. It wasn't like my gay awakening at the time, but it gave me comfort in knowing that I wasn't alone in some of the trials and tribulations young queer people go through in trying to find themselves. But there was like a comedy to it and a rawness to it that deeply resonated with me. And it was actually my English teacher suggested I read it.
How old were you when she suggested?
He suggested I was high school.
Okay.
Yeah, I was early high school, I think. Because what year?
I believe the book is 2002, but the movie is 2006.
Right.
So I think I must have read it, I think like around the time the movie came out, which would put me in middle school.
That makes sense for me too. Yeah, somewhere in the middle high school range. And I went to a really non-traditional school where my English requirements in 8th grade were essays.
Oh, wow.
Personal essays at times, or creative. It was any kind of creative writing, could be fiction or nonfiction. So I was like writing my lore. And it was 20 pages a week. We had to turn in 20 pages a week. And that was my English class. And I actually might have read Running with Scissors in 8th grade too.
That would make
Which would be around the same time as the Ryan Murphy movie. Which I read the book before I saw the movie.
Me too, but I rewatched the movie last night. First of all,
Did you?
I had no idea it was a Ryan Murphy movie because like it just predated Glee.
Of course,
so I didn't know, but like justice for that movie because it's a 33% on Rotten Tomatoes.
That's crazy.
Annette Bening and Brian Cox are holding that film far down to the point where like how dare they?
I actually think it's a great film. I have no qualms with that film. I think people are just homophobic. And people don't know how to deal with the realities of what happens to queer youth when you don't have systems to support your sexual awakening, etc.
Well, I mean, reading it and watching it again in the context of having read your memoir. I mean, it really, I mean, no, but like,
Yeah.
it doesn't surprise me that that was a book that made you feel like you could write a book.
It did, because I would write stuff, and I remember I would get called into teachers' meetings and they'd be like, are you okay? And then I would say, I was like, oh no, that's made up. Even though it wasn't.
It wasn't.
Yeah. And I remember I also read Dry. I don't know if you've read Dry by Augusten Burroughs, which is his getting sober book.
I might have at the
Highly
time.
recommend.
Yeah.
Another addict book I love is Portrait of an Addict as a Young Man by Bill Clegg.
I have not. I've always wanted to read it.
Great. I mean, you'll read it in a day.
Yeah.
Like, it's a probably, I mean, I presumably you read my book quite quickly, because you probably read a lot of books quite quickly, but I also, from what I understand, my book is a quick read. So I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing.
No, I think that's great.
But it's coming out in the summer, so take it to the beach. But I think, obviously, the influence of Burroughs and Severance is probably evident in my book in many ways. I also used to read, like, Chelsea Handler books.
I
so funny.
spoke to Chelsea in this video series a couple weeks ago.
She's so funny.
She
Pee myself laughing.
She's still so funny.
She's still so funny. I've never met her, but maybe one day I'll have the privilege. But yeah, I don't know. I think that book broke me.
Yeah, well, I think reading it now, I mean, we've had so many conversations like about the trauma plot and the ways in which trauma is talked about in this day and age. And I think, I mean, which serves its purpose and is important in many ways. But I really liked going back and seeing the ways that, like, it's a dark book, but it is treated with so much, like, humor and irreverence. And you were so dropped into what it felt like to be Augusten at that time. So you're not reading it from, like, 40-year-old POV. You're like, this is the moment, and he's newly out, and the only option to explore his sexuality that he can find is a man 30 years older than him.
100%.
And that is, obviously problematic in many ways, but the desire and that confusion and all those things are existing and grappled with in a way that I thought was really beautiful in your book, and the fact that, like, it was really just about how you were feeling and grappling with those experiences.
Yeah. Something that I love about Burroughs' book, or Augusten Burroughs' book, is that it feels so present and urgent in the experience of a teenager, but still maintains perspective of an adult, which is a really challenging thing to do. Sometimes, and there's a singular voice to it, which I think is beautiful. Yeah. I found it really hard as I was writing my book, I knew really quickly, just based on, like, the type of person I am and how I write and how I explore and how I, like, investigate my life, that my book was going to have different perspectives and different voices and different points of view, simply because certain stories only come from one part of my brain for whatever reason, or they manifest out of a different part of my body that then comes to the page. So I'm always impressed, obviously, with, like, any writer who has that sort of consistency. For me, I write in, like, sprints and fevers, so it's not always, it's like my handwriting always changes too, which I think they say is sociopathic, but I'm just gonna have to surrender to that.
How drastically does your handwriting change?
Like, it's partially pen based, it's speed, it's who I'm writing to, or why, or what I'm writing.
Are you left-handed or right-handed?
Right-handed. Okay. But as a kid, I lied and told everyone I was ambidextrous.
I completely see.
And they'd be like, prove it. And I'd be like, okay.
My grandma still lies about that. She's like 95 and thinks it's a flex.
Well, in my head, I was like a ballet dancer, and I was like, well, everything I do in ballet, I turn better to the left. I do all this stuff better to the left, and my left side's more flexible. Like, I can take my left leg over here. My right leg doesn't even go that far. So in my head, I was also a left-sided person. Okay,
so I mean, you've got me convinced now.
So listen, if you're the jury, I'm ambidextrous. No, but I do think that I don't know. Yeah, I was really inspired. There is one chapter in my book that I wrote from my sort of, like, 14-year-old self, and it was the only way that I felt like I could effectively tell that story without a lot of vitriol towards the other person.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Did you look back at those essays that you'd written in middle school as you were working on this, or are they lost to the world?
A lot of those were lost because a lot of it was literally, like, penmanship, or you would type it and print it And like my ass was always procrastinating. So I'd be like typing it the day. I would be like puking 20 pages on like the library computer,
Sure.
printing it and handing it over. What I will say is I did directly copy paste things from like 2011 that are in my Google Drive.
I love that.
Yeah, there's a lot of like unedited lore in there.
Amazing. Another book that you brought today, which I'm going to pull out because otherwise I'm going to botch an element of... Well, it's just a hard title. It's just hard to like, which is, do you want to read it?
Clear water.
In a Pool Painted Black by Cookie Mueller.
Say it again.
Walking through clear water in a pool painted black?
Yes!
Okay, I did it.
Yes!
I did it. I had been aware of Cookie for a long time, but hadn't read her prior to this. What made you, and I love her, what made you pick her today? Hers and her the book, or her as in...
I wish I could pick her. Look at how beautiful.
I was looking at the Nan Golden photos that Nan Golden took of her, and I was like, oh my God.
I did not know of her as a writer. I stumbled upon this book in Berlin, as one does, at a bookstore. The weather was shitty. I went to a bookstore. I picked it because One Nightstand, it felt appropriate. It is a really good nightstand book.
Yeah.
Because its essays, some fiction, some nonfiction, some deep lore, some complete memoir, some this long. Like it's the perfect book to have on your nightstand.
Yeah.
And in your bag, like if you're a commuter, if you're on the train, because it offers just like vignettes, and some of those vignettes relate to one another and some of them don't at all. And it's like one of my favorite kinds of books is this book. And this just felt like the most interesting to me, one, because I do love the time period in which she was living and thriving. It deals with themes of addiction and recovery and sexual trauma, but through a darkly comedic, beautifully poetic writer, in a way that like the way that she writes, like her brain is delicious. Like I don't know how she writes like this, because it's so fearless and it's so perfect and imperfect, and it feels completely unedited, and yet still pithy and concise. And the imagery is, to me, like, I mean, I'm the kind of reader, some people don't do this, but like I see the movie version while I'm reading it. But there are a lot of people who are like, I have no visual reference for what these people look like in the book. I'm just like following the words, and like that's what's working for me. This offered me like, it's a cinematic universe in a book.
Well, I wanted to know if you have ambitions of playing Cookie.
I mean,
like, is that a life story you'd love to adapt?
I would love to. I'm like, if anybody wants to do it, let's do it. There's so much. You could make full TV shows out of like singular essays in here.
Is there an essay in particular that you think like is really ripe for an adaptation?
Like the road trip on 95 or whatever. Doesn't that feel like?
Yeah, you can
it's
see
like.
it.
I also think like early in the book, there's the stories about like the I haven't read the book, and now it's been like 2 years, but like the 2 to 3 people that she's seeing, and like the farming, the guy who like the guy who lives on the farm, like the cowboy guy.
I was cherry picking a little bit because
that's totally fine. You didn't have time.
Yeah.
So yeah. Anyway, I think there's a lot of like love triangle, Vicky Cristina Barcelona adjacent lore. Not to bring Woody Allen into this conversation, but
the movies are good,
I will.
Man.
I know. I feel like I also love multidisciplinary artists. I am deeply attracted to them. I think that, she was not only an incredible actress, she was also an incredible personality. She was an incredible friend, and lived life fully in a way that I deeply admire, like in a fearless, truly fearless way. Through all of life's traumas that were, some self-inflicted, some not self-inflicted. I mean, there's like a moment she talks about a sexual assault and the moon, and like how the perpetrator was like praying to get an erection, and she's like, the way that she digests it is like, is God going to be on my side or his side?
Yeah.
You know, and you're just like, and, you know, ends up being able to escape that situation. But I also think, you know, she's a muse in a way that is deeply, I've always been attracted to like addicts who are muses. I used to tell my parents I wanted to be Edie Sedgwick when I grew up, including the death. Like,
I mean, how formative was Factory Girl?
Of course, right?
Which,
for
look,
us.
I mean,
13,
Factory Factory, because like they were coming out when we were in middle school.
Yeah,
though.
they were.
And it was like they taught me what it meant to be a woman.
They were hitting the spots, and I think like
to date, I still think an incredible Sienna Miller performance. Nobody can take
one
that
of
away
her
from
best.
her. Yeah.
No, she should have been nominated.
Agree.
I was just gonna say, like, yeah, to both be like John Waters' muse and a formative artist in your own right and a beautiful writer, like and to have lived a life like that is so, and then the service of sharing it, whether she chose to share it in this way or not, like the service of giving some of the most difficult stories in your life, because I'm sure there are difficult stories that aren't in this book that we don't even, I mean, I can speak from my own experience of writing a memoir. There's many, many things about my life or things that happened or that I did not include. And, you know, that's editing and that's trying to focus and have a through line in some capacity. But I think that this is a great gift to like culture and also humanity.
Well, now I'm going to read the quote that I pulled out because it reminded me a lot of your book in many ways. Why does everybody think I'm so wild? I'm not wild. I happen to stumble onto wildness. It gets in my path. You know, you've done a lot of work on yourself, and you chart that throughout the book, but I was wondering if that was ever the story you told yourself.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was identified as like a crazy person all the time. And I was like, I'm not crazy. This is just what's happening.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't ask for all of these things to happen. But upon reflection,
You very much did.
I don't know. I mean,
No,
there are
I
certain
know,
things
I
that I
know.
definitely didn't, but I did want to live a life on the edge.
Yeah.
For sure. I wanted to live fast, die young. Bad girls do it, right? Like, I really felt that was in my DNA.
I think rebellion was marketed to our generation, like with the advent of like 24-hour news cycle, tabloid coverage, Perez Hilton.
Well, I mean, I was like, we grew up with the bimbos of Hollywood.
Yeah, I mean,
you will.
we were at the Bimbo Summit was our
Exactly.
youth, so I think that it makes a lot of sense.
I mean,
to me.
I think the other thing that I really related to with Cookie, and I think a lot of addicts would relate to this, is existing entirely in fight or flight.
Yeah.
In pulling a geographic. I mean, I was always disappearing.
Really.
Disappearing from club to club to club, disappearing from home, and waking up in different cities, like waking up in apartments and houses, and like days would go by that were completely a blur, and I had no idea how I got where I got alive. And I think I feel so much of that in her book. It's like she's such a traveler, and you could say it's not by choice, but it is.
But it is.
You know?
I thought about, because I've read so much more Eve Babbitt's, and I think they frequently get compared to each other.
That's interesting.
I mean, the thing with Eve, I think, similarly, was a muse to many, was a successful writer in her own right, and had a very wild life, or you know. But when I think about the emotions that animate her work, it's a lot of rage and jealousy and just anger. And Cookie does not live like that.
No.
Cookie is so deadpan. And the first to a joke I like was there's like that great quote. She says something about like she had a pelvis injury, and like John Waters went to visit her, and she was like, "Women troubles, hun." Like, you know, just very always. And I think you did embody quite a bit of, you know, there's not a lot of rage is not the animating factor of the book. There's a lot of this irreverence, like, you know, that we talked about now in the past two
Yeah.
books we're chatting about.
I'm not a rageful person. I'm just not. Like, it just isn't in my, I'm not a super combative person. I'm not a super rageful person. It takes a lot for me to get heated in that way. And I think, if anything, I'm like a people pleaser, and so is she, and it's like so are so many people. And I just, I couldn't process my personal lore without grace and comedy and like healing in some capacity. It just like, I wouldn't have been able to write that. Like, I just don't think it would have happened.
Okay, my last cookie related question. If you were, the green light is on the table, you're doing this book. I mean, you're doing the movie.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, the movie version. You're Cookie, who's your John Waters? Who do you cast?
Can't I just cast John Waters? He's still alive.
No, because that's the game.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Cody Smith McPhee.
I see it.
Right? Mm-hmm. Visually. I just had to close my eyes and see
I
who
see it.
also could play Cookie. I just had to close my eyes and see who made sense. And at least to me, that is what makes sense. And the bigger question is, like, who's playing Divine? Like, I mean, there's who's playing the rest of the John Waters universe.
I know. I mean, we could sort the rest of the books. We could cast for days.
Oh my goodness! But that resonates with me for some reason. I don't actually know if that would be good casting or
I
not.
like the idea of it.
Yeah.
I see the vision.
Yeah.
Okay. Severance by Ling Ma.
Right.
Tell me what made you want to chat about this one today.
Oh, nice. I haven't seen this cover. Mine's pink and it just says Severance.
Yeah, that was that. I remember when that book came out in 2018. And it's like a really sexy, like that was like hype millennial pink, really
Very
good cover.
And they said, let's figure out something different.
Exactly.
No. I picked it because, why did I pick this book? I don't know. It just came to my brain. I was also looking at my bookshelf and I was like, Severance by Ling Ma. I think because I do love fantasy. I love post-apocalyptic things.
Do you?
And I read this I started reading it before the pandemic. It was during like fashion month. It was like my fashion month book. And it just felt so kismet.
Mm-hmm.
God, you know what I wish I'd picked is 1Q84.
Which I
by
haven't read.
Murakami.
We got assigned a lot of Murakami in high school English. That was like, I also went to a very liberal, like hippy dippy humanities school. But I like Murakami a lot, but I haven't dipped my toes back in since.
So my issue is I read that first. I read those 3 books first, and I can't read anything else. Every time I try, I'm like, it's not 1Q84.
Yeah.
So I've not been able to finish any other Murakami apart from the longest Murakami, I guess, which is this series of 3 books that you can buy as one. I feel like something about the timeliness of this, it felt like divine to be reading this book about like a global pandemic that destroys the world. While we were going through a global pandemic that felt like it was going to turn into this. And I loved having this like fear lore that was like I was having like a real fear while I was reading this book that is kind of scary. And I do think this idea that you could be like so stuck in your own shit that you don't even realize that the world is burning around you.
Yeah.
Which is what is happening.
It's perpetual. Yeah. I mean, the thing is, it was not meant to be like, you read this book now and you think it's like a dramatization of the pandemic we went through, but
You're
really
like, no,
it's actually
it
late stage
a prediction,
capitalism.
and it's actually late stage capitalism, and it's what's happening thematically today. I mean, it feels rings very true. Like, take the plague aside.
In context of this book, when the world started slowing down, was that really hard for you to like take a step back from work? Like, was that or?
No, I was really grateful for that. Which sounds fucked up.
No. I mean,
but I think I needed to reckon with a few things that were going on in my body and in my brain and in my life, and maybe I needed a fucking reality check, honestly, which I think it provided for a lot of people. I'm part of the trans class of 2020 for sure. I think a lot of people transitioned during the pandemic. And so I needed that time I really liked having that time to do that. And also it gave me space to think about what kind of art I actually wanted to be making and what kind of career I actually wanted to have, and if I was even going to have one, you know.
Mm-hmm. And you began writing the book also as essays at that time.
Yeah, I did.
And what was that like those early days? I mean, you had writing experience. You'd even in school.
Yeah, I had always wanted to write a book. I just didn't know when or why or what it was going to be. But sort of at the beginning of my medical transition, if you want to call it that, or whatever, I did have anger. I had a lot of anger at myself for waiting so long, and I didn't know why I was waiting so long or what was I actually afraid of. Because like if the world can shut down like this, and if everything is so fragile and temporary, why wasn't I living my life before? And I think a lot of people were faced with those deep questions in isolation, surrounded by death in the media and in the streets. And I had a lot of shame and confusion that I needed to, and I had questions that I wanted to investigate. There were things that I didn't remember clearly, or that I misremembered, or that I completely made up because I was protecting some part of myself. And I really started as like an investigative, my own sort of investigation of identity and adulthood and childhood, and trying to make sense of what stopped me as a kid from continuing to present as a girl, because I did for quite a while. And so I just was really curious about those things. And it wasn't necessarily, I clean it up in the book, obviously, but at the time I wasn't like, I'm going to write a full book. Mm-hmm. I wasn't calling this a memoir until I got told I had to.
Yeah.
I was never calling this a memoir. And
what were you calling it?
Just collection of essays.
Yeah.
Yeah, it never felt like a memoir. I mean, and I understand that it does feel that way now, and there is a substantive reason to call it that. But I felt it didn't feel adequate for me, and while I was writing it, that didn't feel like a helpful thing to call it. So I was thinking about it as like vignettes, essentially, of life and my life, and puzzle pieces that I was trying to put together. And Tara was genuinely the thing that helped open up my past for me, because I had forgotten a lot of things. So it was like a card would lead to a story, 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 would lead to a story. And then I was like, wrote all these stories, and then I started to piecemeal them together. So the process of early writing, I was having an experience of being in Montana, where I'd never been, with a family that I knew really well but weren't my family, during a pandemic. But that part that got like itchy scratchy, that summer 2020, not the beginning. And also my mom's brother, who I'm named after, was born in Montana. So then I had this like woo-woo, like I'm with my namesake and he's always with me. And I just felt like a deep connection. I was also just starting estrogen. And so I was like, had emotions for the first time. I just like, there were a lot of things going on, and it felt like this was the only way I could process it.
Well, it seems like, you were talking about liking reading Severance during a pandemic, but because it was just like piling on the emotion and the fear, all these things, it seems like you like the extremes.
I like the masochism of the extreme. Yeah. I like to squeeze life, both both in the drama of life and in the serenity of life. I like to live. I like to live, oscillating between 0 and 10 as much as possible. Yeah, I'm in it for the lore for sure.
I mean, even doing 2 theatrical performances, like theater back to
Insane.
back,
Yeah,
like, we were just like, whatever is the most, it seems like you'll do the most whenever the most is
yeah, I think
presented
that's
to you.
because I'm an addict. Like,
Yeah,
I
well.
genuinely, I like, in order to feel something, I kind of have to, or change something, I have to always bottom out on it. In order to like feel something, I kind of have to have the largest expression of it, and then I can bring it in and whatever. Like, my acting process is very paint with a really wide brush, and then I start to like tailor, like corseting it and focusing it. But I also hadn't acted in so long, so it was like, I'm like, if the thread keeps pulling, I'm going to keep pulling the thread, and I'll move the other stuff that I thought I was going to be doing, because actually this is what the world wants me to do right now. Like, I'll just keep pulling at threads. And when one thread gives up, I just move. I'm like, okay.
What are you getting out of the return? Like, so doing more acting than you had in a while?
I'm getting like a true liberation of self. And I'm learning how to really not give a fuck anymore. And I'm learning so much more about my body and my stamina, my endurance, my craft, my like humanity, compassion. I'm learning how to focus in different ways. I'm getting to experience what it's like to be violent in ways that I've never been able to be in my real life through character, specifically in Romeo and Juliet. I also had the experience of getting to be a mother in Romeo and Juliet, or maternal in a way that I'd never been provided. And now with Becoming Eve, I'm getting this really cool experience of like love.
Yeah.
And seeking love and validation, and also like emancipating yourself from inherited traumas and like ancestral bonds that were suffocating you. I mean, as we get into I Know Why the Cage Bird Sings, like, it's like, yeah, I think Abby was stuck in a gilded cage that she needed to break free from, and the only way she could break free from it was to escape and leave and step into her womanhood and her identity. And so that's a really cool experience to have and get to bring audiences into. I'm also getting the relationship of surrender. I'm getting to surrender in a new way. Like, the thing I love about directing is that I have power, and that I have autonomy, and I can like choose all my collaborators, and I can finesse things. Same with writing. I have it's completely autonomous in a lot of ways. I mean, it's very collaborative. There's a lot of people along the way who help you. But ultimately, like, I have to sit down and write the thing. And then I rely on collaborators for other things. And directing to me is a huge collaboration behind the lens, obviously. It's like I'm operating with a team of 60 to 120 people at a time, and we're building something together. But ultimately, I'm the one that has to answer all the questions. And it works really great if you have ADHD. But acting is like, I get to be a sub. And like, that's the gift. I get to be of service to someone else's story, to a character that isn't me, to a director that I either like or I don't like, or I don't care about, whatever, or like hopefully that I love. I get to be a sub to their dom, like, and I get to surrender to audiences, and that's why I love theater too. It's like I just have to surrender to whatever's going to happen, because who knows?
How often when you're reading are you thinking about wanting to adapt as someone who, I mean, and I don't know if you can talk about this on the record or not, but like Ali Rowbottom, for example. Can we talk about aesthetica during this, or is that all like?
I cannot talk about it yet, but we are going to announce it soon.
Okay.
Because it's been a process. So if you know Ali, I'm sure you know the process.
I know it all takes a while.
And my first film was an adaptation.
Yeah.
And I'm about to announce like a bunch of stuff. I'm really
Anything
excited.
you want to do right now?
Well, I'm announcing my production company, which is called Fever Dream, and in partnership with Tricky Knot, which is a new studio production hybrid that invests in talent-led pods. So like Jeremy O'Harris, Cami Mendez, Harris Dickinson, myself. There's a few of us who have pods with them, and they're amazing.
Great.
And
is that
but I'm also directing the adaptation of Laura Dean Keeps Breaking Up with Me, which we're going to announce the cast for very soon, which I'm excited about, which is a graphic novel that I really love. This like sapphic queer kind of John Hughes tonal graphic novel. It's really beautiful. Yes, I do read often with producer, director, writer, brain in mind. Yes.
Yeah. Well, the last book we have is I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. What made you want to talk about that one today?
It just, I mean, really growing up as like a white kid in Georgia was like the first book that opened my brain and my heart to like the community around me and the just the systemic racism within this country and globally. And I found even within the stories, within her life story of her adolescence into adulthood, you know, which came at a much younger age for Maya than it should have. But that's circumstantial, both of a time, but also of, you know, her lived experience. And I think I still, even though my circumstances were very different, did relate to her on an emotional level and a feeling of being trapped in a system that is oppressive and violent and dangerous and terrifying in a very different way. But I think I picked it because still today it is one of the few books that I think has genuinely opened my body up to be like compassionate and empathetic towards someone else's like lived experience in a real way, in a long, life altering way.
When did you read it for the first time?
In school. Yeah. Like elementary school, middle school, like early school. And I also think, and now that I can like reflect on it from an adult perspective and recognize that through literature, she was able to emancipate herself through becoming a mother, through moving, right? Which was not in her control at all. Still making whatever she could make out of each experience and building from those things. But I also think like her ability to break the form of what the world thought autobiography had to be at that time is really inspiring to me, because it's like, and I think it is often those who are the most oppressed who create the most change, because they're not thinking in there is no roadmap. So you're forced to create the roadmap for yourself.
Welcome into the canon.
So it's like, why try to be in the canon? Why try to do what anyone else is doing? Because it doesn't fucking matter anyway. So why don't you just do what you know how to do, or what you probably didn't know that you could do, but you did, you know? I think it's just, it radically shifted what I thought writing was, how I like what I understood prose to be, what I understood autofiction, autobiography to be, what I understood memoir to be, and just a deeply, deeply human story that I think is essential reading, genuinely.
I think, well, as I was revisiting it ahead of our conversation, like I said, I read it in school as well, and we really studied her adolescence. I had less awareness, or maybe I had forgotten over the years, of what an unbelievably abundant life she went on to have. Like, she directed a movie with Alfre Woodard and Wesley Snipes. She was nominated for a Tony. She had an R&B album that she came out. Like,
she's a multidisciplinary artist. This is the theme that we're
that's where we met
dealing
to.
with
But I was
here.
like, oh my God, she got, she
was the first Black streetcar conductor in San Francisco.
It's
like
just
at 16.
Yeah,
like
it's
it was
just
like
unbelievable.
It was like as a teenager, it's like it started very young.
She just got, I mean, she was the first poet to speak at an inauguration since Robert Frost. Like, it's just so remarkable because, yes, the story of her adolescence is so profound and is such a portal into empathy and understanding people's lives and what it means to have an existence very different than your own. But God, is it amazing to see, like, the fruits of her labor.
I mean, the amount of, even if you were just looking at her as an author, the amount that she was able to create in a lifetime, and of a certain, like at the level. I'm so tired.
I mean,
but at the level she was able to do it with like an incredible amount of integrity in her own craft and like singularity in her voice, and then to still continue to do other things.
Completely. I don't know. I just like the quote it reminded me of is very much like Beyonce. You have the same 24 hours in a day as Beyonce. I'm like, I have the same 24 hours in a day as Maya Angelou. Like,
literally.
My God, that woman squeezed it all out of life.
Yeah, you do. And then I think also it's like, as much as you're like always working on stuff, she also strikes me as, and I don't know this to be true or not true, and I should probably now I'm going to like go home and like spend time just watching interviews with her or whatever I can. But I'm sure she also knew how to just dream too.
Yeah.
And I feel that in her work, like that she also allowed herself time to create in a meaningful way that was in, I think, opposition to capitalism, because it wasn't all driven by a certain deadline that needed to be hit because of X, Y, and Z. Well,
now with this memoir on the horizon coming out soon, what are you dreaming of next?
So before my memoir comes out, I'm dreaming of a vacation.
Yeah.
Because I haven't taken one in a long time. So I'm going to try and take a couple of days off, which might just be at my apartment.
Yeah.
But it might not be. Who knows? After my book comes out and I'm done doing press, I'm going to continue producing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. That's all I know how to do. I've got a lot of projects that I'm working on. I've got a lot of collaborators. I have a company now with Alyssa Ryman, who's my VP of development, and we are building our slate. So I'm doing a lot of script reading, a lot of book reading, a lot of coverage reading. I have stuff going into production this year and next year. And I'm going to write another movie this fall. And I already know what it is. I'm excited. But before that, I think I'm going to try to make Laura Dean.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I might try to move to Europe.
Oh, okay, casual. Yeah. That's like that's the throw in at the end. Where in Europe?
Spain, maybe.
Okay.
Maybe Spain will save me.
Maybe Spain will save you. Well, Tommy, thank you so much for coming today. I hope Spain saves you.
Thanks for having me.